What's up, cousins, and welcome back to our very first episode in 2026, y'all. Dang, I can't believe I've been doing this for 2 years now. We've been having a time here at the dinner table, okay, honey? But welcome back, cousins. I missed y'all. If you're new here, come on in, sit down, get comfortable, because I have a juicy one for y'all this week. And I had to kick off this New Year's case with something that was gonna have you rubbing your chinny chin. And this case right here is gonna do it. So y'all already know what to do. Get your wine, get your popcorn, whatever you need, and let's dive in.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
So this week at the dinner table, I'll be telling y'all about the disappearance of Shelton John Sanders. And a good majority of the information that I received from this case came directly from Shelton's younger sister, Wilveria. Now, she was only 11 years old when her brother vanished, but she never stopped loving him, she never stopped remembering him, and she never stopped searching. And throughout the years, she and her family have been determined to figure out what happened to her brother. They began speaking out, sharing Shelton's story, and refusing to let his name be forgotten. But Shelton was one of 4 kids born to William and Peggy Sanders. And if you ask anybody in his family, Shelton was the one that everybody looked up to. He was one of the oldest, he was the dependable one, and he was the example. He was just the kind of son and brother who carried responsibility without ever complaining. And he was coming up in a time where computers were starting to change the world. And your boy Shelton was right there with the change. Because technology wasn't just something he used, it was something he understood. But this man wasn't sitting inside locked behind the computer screen all day. Shelton was outside, okay? He was a Boy Scout and he loved animals. He played the percussion in high school in the marching band, and he was just a well-rounded young man overall. So once he graduated from Wellcrest High School in 1994, he later enrolled at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, and he was majoring in administrative information management. Now, while most students were just trying to survive class to class, Shelton was actually building a really good reputation for himself, because around campus, people knew him as the computer guy. He was the one that everyone called when nothing else would work. And while Shelton was taking classes, he worked as the computer manager at USC's School of Medicine, which is cool. So he was dependable, reliable, and he was just always on point. And on top of that, your boy had a 3.5 GPA. And he was on track to graduate in December of 2001. And that same year, he was only turning 25. So at this time, he was living at his parents' house in Rembert, South Carolina. I hope I said that right. And he was having to make a 40-mile drive to Columbia every single day. And yet, he never slowed down. He was all gas, no brakes, okay? He had plans, and big plans. Shelton wanted to open up his own computer programming company, and he already had his own website. It was called sandzones.com. Not to mention, he already had a whole bunch of other business ideas lined up already. So he was really out here trying to build something with a solid foundation. And to top it off, he wasn't just a man with good work ethic. This man would give you the shirt off his back. But he was a proud Dallas Cowboys fan. He loved to grill, loved sports, and he loved being around people. He was humble, patient, funny, generous, and everybody just loved him. So yes, he was a little bit of a workaholic, but more than that, he was full of purpose, y'all. And he was locked in on his future. He was a young Black man doing everything right. And that's what makes what happened next so devastating. Because Shelton was on the verge of everything, and he never got the chance to live it. In Shelton's last hours alive, this man was busy. But like I said earlier, he was responsible and he was reliable. And in 2001, he was known to call home throughout the day and let his family know about his plans, when they should be expecting him, so on and so forth. Now, Shelton also had a really close group of friends as well. And they were all at this crossroads in their life, getting ready to graduate from college, going into adulthood, beginning their careers, and, just starting life. And one of his close friends, Brian, was actually getting married that summer. And Shelton, of course, was the best man. So this was supposed to be a season of celebration. So on June 19th, 2001, started like any other Tuesday for Shelton. That morning, he got up and he made his usual drive from Rembert to Columbia for his class, and then he was scheduled to work his job as a systems manager at the university. And for Shelton, this was just a usual day of juggling responsibility. But the only thing that was different was that he didn't have his car. Because you see, his car was in the shop. So he was driving his younger brother's 1988 Oldsmobile Regency. And driving his younger brother's car wasn't ideal for him because, as dependent as he was, I'm sure he did not like having to rely on his younger brother. So he had plans to go to class, go to work, run his errands as quickly as possible, and then bring his brother's car straight home. So after work that afternoon, Shelton's plan was plain and simple. He was supposed to meet up with his homeboys so that they can reserve the hotel rooms around Columbia for Brian's upcoming bachelor party. Now, as far as his group of friends went, some of them have been friends way back since high school. Some of them met in college. You know how friend groups go. However, they were all pretty tight. So it was said that one of Shelton's homeboys was supposed to ride with him so that they can go check out some hotel rooms for the bachelor party. So Shelton pulls up to his homeboy's house as planned, but once he got there, plans changed. So now Shelton was kind of stuck. So about 30 to 45 minutes later, a dude named Mark Richardson shows up. Now, Mark was a friend that Shelton had met in college, and Shelton explained the situation. He still needed to reserve these rooms, and he needed someone to ride with them. So Mark is like, oh, okay, I'll ride with you. So before they leave, Shelton straight up tells him, we gotta hurry up because I'm driving my brother's car, and I need to get it back to him. So Mark agrees, we gotta hurry up, let's get this done. But he tells Shelton that he needs to stop by his house so that he can change it to his work clothes first. So Shelton agrees to follow Mark to his house, and then while driving, Shelton went ahead and made a couple phone calls home. So first he called his house phone to check in with his brother, let him know what was going on. He explained all he had to do was just reserve a couple rooms for the bachelor party, and then he was going to be right home. And his brother, just being a brother, asked him straight up, how long you think it's going to be? And Shelton tells him he'll be home within the next 2 hours. So that call happened around 8:40 p.m. Then he went ahead and called his mom, told her the same thing, that he was running a little late and he was going to be home soon. And those 2 calls would be the last calls that Shelton ever made to his family. And at that time, no one had any reason to believe that something so routine, so ordinary, would turn into the beginning of a nightmare. After Shelton got to Mark's house, Mark told him that he couldn't find his phone and he asked Shelton if he can call it. So Shelton did exactly that. That call was made at 9:07 p.m. and it would become the last recorded activity on Shelton's phone. So Shelton had already checked in with his family earlier that evening, letting them know that he would be home within the next 2 hours. And about 10 minutes later, he placed his final call to Mark. So according to Mark, the 2 of them went to 3 hotels in the Columbia area, trying to find the right place for the upcoming bachelor party. But this is where things start to get a little bit murky. Because roughly between 9:30 and 10:45, Shelton and Mark went to the Wesley Inn Suites in Irmo, the Embassy Suites in Irmo, and then finally they went to the Residence Inn, which is located along Stone Ridge Drive. Now, what's unclear but important is who was riding with who. Because in some statements, Mark says that he rode in Shelton's brother's Oldsmobile, and then in other statements, he claims that Shelton rode with him in his Mitsubishi. And the details change depending on when and who Mark is talking to. Now, when the cops later went to these 3 hotels and showed photos of the 2 men to the employees, it is confirmed that Shelton was present. And receipts show Shelton used his own credit card during the hotel visits. So after booking the room at the Residence Inn, Mark says that the 2 returned back to his house at around 11 or 11:30 p.m. Mark says that he invited Shelton inside to hang out for a little bit, but Shelton declined. Because of course Shelton had to get back home to take his brother his car. So Mark says that Shelton then left his house, and that, according to Mark, was the last time he ever saw Shelton. But he never made it home, and neither did that car. because the next morning on June 20th, Shelton's mom received a call from his job asking if they knew where Shelton was. But she didn't, and neither did anyone else. Shelton's family immediately tried to reach out to him, but every call was going straight to voicemail. And for anyone who knew Shelton, that was alarming. Because, like we said before, Shelton was reliable and he was responsible. And my man was going to check in with his folks. He wouldn't just disappear without telling anybody, and he most certainly wasn't just about to up and leave his life. And law enforcement believed that as well. So the police in Sumter County immediately started monitoring Shelton's bank accounts, but there was no activity, no single charge. His phone was never powered back on. They never received another text, another call, nothing. So authorities searched highways between Sumter and Richland counties because they were thinking that maybe Shelton had been involved in a fatal accident or something like that. So a helicopter was even brought in to scan the area from above. And multiple waterways were searched after anonymous tips claimed that Shelton's body had been dumped in a local river. But nothing turned up. And for a brief moment, investigators started to consider whether maybe Shelton had been a target because of who his father, William Sanders, was. Because, you see, he was a local magistrate. And for those of y'all who don't know, that's a judge who has limited authority to hear certain issues. And in this case, William Sanders handled bond hearings at the Sumter County Correctional Center. Now, this theory went nowhere and was eventually dropped, but they were just grasping for straws at that point, and they didn't have much to go off of. And still his body, the vehicle, or any of his belongings had turned up yet. And the Sanders family even came forward and offered a $20,000 reward for any information leading to the recovery of Shelton's remains. But no one came forward, and Shelton was never found, and neither was that 1988 Oldsmobile, and neither was his black Movado watch he was wearing that night. Shelton Sanders just disappeared, vanished into thin air, and all of these unanswered questions just disappeared with him. But to go back to the days immediately following his disappearance, his dad, William, did what any parent would do. He went looking for his son. So knowing that Shelton had been with his friends the night he vanished, William asked Shelton's brothers to start reaching out. He started calling anyone who might have spoken or seen him last. And for the most part, Shelton's friends were cooperative. They answered questions and they shared what they knew. And they tried to help. All except one, Mark Richardson. And being that he was the true last person to see Shelton alive and well, this immediately stood out. Because instead of concern, Mark showed distance. And he didn't seem to have any sense of urgency or sympathy. And y'all get this, because according to Shelton's family, Mark made it clear that he didn't really like Shelton, and he wasn't even that close with him, despite spending the final hours of Shelton's life with him. So on June 22nd, 2001, William officially filed a missing person report in Sumter County, believing that Shelton had disappeared somewhere along his drive home. Because at that point, the family still didn't fully understand that Shelton's last confirmed location was actually Richland County. So as the family continued making their calls and doing their own investigating, one truth became very clear. Mark's stale baked potato looking ass was in fact the last person to see Shelton alive. And y'all get this, because when William and Shelton's brother reached out to Mark on June 25th, his response was too explosive. Because according to the family, Mark cussed William out, telling him that he didn't have to explain a goddamn thing. And then he accused him of trying to throw his weight around as a judge. Then he just downright refused to answer even the most basic questions about Shelton's last known moments. Now, of course, William was a little thrown by Mark's reaction, but he was still very much determined. So, concerned by Mark's hostility, William contacted law enforcement and asked them to assist in another attempt to speak to Mark that following day. And that's when things shifted, because on June 26th, Mark suddenly changed his tone. Because that same man who had just cussed William out the night before was now addressing him as Mr. Sanders and Shelton's mother as Mrs. Sanders. So he did agree to come over to the family's home and give a statement. So, with the police officer present during this conversation, Mark told the family, and then he went on to later tell the investigators, that Shelton did drop him off at his house sometime between 11 and 11:30 p.m. on June 19th, and then he left to go back to Wimbert. But according to the officer present, Mark appeared to be nervous and defensive, and he repeatedly asked whether he was being considered as a suspect. Now, some of his family members did come forward and express their concern about his behavior leading up to Shelton's disappearance. So, according to people who knew Mark, they said his demeanor drastically changed after he started working for an oil drilling company in the late 90s. And friends described him as paranoid, claiming that he would hear voices and accuse people of talking to him. And he would also allegedly make disturbing comments about harming folks. And y'all, these were claims made by his friends and family, not formal diagnosis. But this was all adding up to a growing unease surrounding Mark. So the Sumter County investigators took statements from Mark, his siblings, and other witnesses, including neighbors who reported hearing gunshots in the area. And then, despite the unanswered questions, the inconsistencies, and the strange behavior, the case just stalled. And for nearly 2 years, there was no major developments. Still no Shelton, no car, and absolutely no answers. Well, that was until April 26, 2003, when Shelton's brother's Oldsmobile was finally found. And with that, a whole new chapter of this case opened up. On April 26, 2003, nearly 2 years after Shelton's disappearance, a noise disturbance was called into the Sumter County Sheriff's Office. And this particular disturbance was reported at the Greenbrier Apartments, which is located right off Park Lane Road in Columbia. And this is important to notice the location because it's only a few miles from where Shelton was last seen. And right there in plain sight, backed into a parking spot and parked between buildings 18 and 20, was that damn 1988 Oldsmobile. And the car they had been looking for the past 2 years. Y'all, this parking spot must have been hella ducked off because there's no way that they kept this car knowing that they had been looking for it in relation to this disappearance for the past 2 years. You definitely should have had that car crushed, taken to another state, something. Now, investigators did later state that the vehicle appeared to have been sitting there for at least 2 months or longer. And of course, some estimated that it had been sitting there for the entire 2-year period because the condition of the car kind of told the story. Because y'all, the tires were completely flat. The gas tank and the oil were nearly empty. And then underneath the car was one of those big black stains on the pavement. And yet, despite having recovered the car, there was no usable evidence recovered. No fingerprints, no DNA, and nothing tying a specific person to the car. All right now, they did something right. And then it gets kind of crazy because the media got a hold of the case and they started reporting making claims that potential evidence may have been compromised at the scene because investigators were said to have touched the door handles before dusting for prints. And they said that the large stain underneath the vehicle hadn't been properly tested either. Now, despite the car being found in Sumter County, it was turned over to the Richland County Sheriff's Office, which had also taken control over the missing persons investigation in the months earlier. So for nearly 2 years, behind the scenes, investigators remained focused on one man, and that was, of course, Mark Richardson. Because we know he was the last person to see Shelton alive, but what the hell did he do to him? So investigators believe that Mark shot Shelton and covered it up afterwards. Because although Mark claimed Shelton dropped him off at home between 11 and 11:30, Mark's cell phone records complicated that story. Because in less than 2 hours after Shelton suddenly left him, Mark's phone showed multiple outgoing calls asking for a ride home from a different part of town, an area that was noticeably close to where Shelton's car would later be found. However, Mark offered an explanation to this. He told investigators that after Shelton left, he went inside his house, gathered his laundry, and then went to a laundromat on Olympia Ave around midnight. There he claimed he ran into a woman named Rita Green, who is said to be a little prostitute, and he's known her for some years now. So according to this dusty man, the two of them agreed to do the nasty, And then afterwards, he asked her for a ride home. He even went on to describe the car as a white four-door car. But while driving along Two Notch Road near I-77, the two apparently got into an argument, and Mark claimed that he said something to upset her and she kicked him out of the car. So now, Mark says he was stranded. And at 12:49 a.m., Mark called his sister asking for a ride. She refused, saying that she was already in bed. Duh. Just like somebody's sister. So at 12:58 a.m., he called his brother. Now, his brother, on the other hand, agreed to come get him. But that was nearly 2 hours after Shelton allegedly left Mark's house. And yet, somehow, Mark was no longer at home, despite claiming that's exactly where Shelton dropped him off after all this time. I'm rubbing my chin. So for investigators and for Shelton's family, these changing details didn't just feel off. They were hard to shake because the car, the timeline, the changing of locations, and this man's story just kept changing. But the one thing that stayed the same was Shelton was still missing. So early in the investigation, actually days after Shelton disappeared, another critical detail came to light. There were 3 gunshots heard that night. Because y'all, get this. A neighbor living right next door to Mark told investigators that the night of June 19th, sometime between 11 and 11:30, they heard the sound of 3 distinct gunshots. And that little window of time, 11 to 11:30, sounds a bit familiar now, doesn't it? Because that's the exact same window of time Mark claimed he and Shelton got back to his house. So, according to this neighbor, the noise was alarming enough that they stepped outside to investigate. But once the man approached Mark's house, though he later said that it was dark and Mark's house sat behind thick bushes, making it hard to see clearly, he says he called out anyways, asking if everything was okay. And Mark's response back was, "Everything's fine, my car just backfired." And this explanation was accepted in the moment, but it wasn't forgotten. But despite Mark being the last person known to see Shelton alive, and despite the growing list of circumstantial red flags, investigators struggled to uncover direct evidence tying Mark to Shelton's disappearance. But back in 2001, when the investigation first started, police executed a search warrant of Mark's home, and there they recovered multiple weapons, including a .45 caliber handgun, a knife, and they also learned that Mark tried to sell a .38 revolver just 4 days after Shelton went missing. And at that time in 2001, nothing definitively tied those weapons to Shelton. But of course, this behavior was adding suspicion around Mark. But when Shelton's car was discovered in 2003, the case officially shifted from the Richmond County Sheriff's Department. And with that, it meant that they had to start re-interviewing witnesses, both old and new. So they brought Mark's raggedy self back in. And y'all get this, because during his interview, he asked the investigators, quote, "Is there such thing as accidental death in South Carolina? Boy, do you want to find out?" And then this man follows up with something even more unsettling. He asks, quote, "How can I explain getting rid of a body?" You can go to prison. Now, with this interview coming to an end and still no evidence to charge this man with, in the years following this, the investigators continued digging. And cell phone records placed Mark near the Two Notch Road Tower, just blocks from where Shelton's car was found. And that proximity became even harder to ignore when Mark repeated his story about being stranded after the argument with the woman he claimed was a prostitute. And of course, investigators weren't convinced, but time still kept ticking away. Because in October of 2005, authorities executed another search warrant at Mark's house. And this time, they snatched up computers, laptops, and whatever else raised new concerns. And on this man's computers, he had been researching missing persons and abduction cases. And get this, because he'd also been searching Shelton Sanders' name repeatedly. But to this, he admitted that he was monitoring the investigation, but it was just to keep up with what the police knew. And even with DNA swabs taken, luminol testing, there was still no evidence tying Mark directly to Shelton. There was still no DNA, no blood, and no smoking gun. But investigators believed that the story was bigger than what science could prove. So in October of 2005, more than 4 years after Shelton vanished, 30-year-old Mark Richardson was arrested and charged with Shelton's murder. Now, prosecutors knew that they faced an uphill battle in this case because, of course, there was no body, no crime scene, and no confession. So they had to build their case strictly around circumstantial evidence, behavioral patterns, and Mark's documented mental health decline. Now, if you remember from earlier, Mark's friends and family reported that he claimed to hear voices, and voices that encouraged violent thoughts. And it said that this behavior started around 1999 or 2000. But by the time the case went to trial in 2008, the state wasn't trying to explain how Shelton died. They were trying to explain why he was never found at all, and whether the truth had been hiding in plain sight from the very beginning. So when the case went to trial, the prosecutors weren't just fighting for a conviction, they were fighting against time. And people who knew Mark during that time period, friends, acquaintances, even family, described a man whose behavior had grown increasingly paranoid and unsettling. They said Mark was no longer the same person. He accused people of talking to him, following him, plotting against him, and some even claimed that he would hear voices that scared even the people closest to him. And yes, the prosecutors also introduced the testimony from Mark's neighbors, who then recalled hearing those 3 gunshots coming from his house the night of June 19, 2001. And the timing lined up precisely with Mark's own account when he claimed that Shelton dropped him off at his house. And one neighbor testified that he went outside just minutes later to check on Mark. And when he asked about the noise, Mark allegedly brushed it off, saying that his car backfired in the garage. But the concern didn't end there, because they also brought up that 2001 search of Mark's home, during which they found that .45 caliber handgun. And then friends would later tell investigators that in the days following Shelton's disappearance, he tried to sell that .38 revolver, reportedly telling folks, quote, he didn't need it anymore. However, without Shelton's body, those weapons became pretty meaningless. Therefore, there was nothing to compare them to, no ballistics and no forensic link. Only suspicion, and us sitting here rubbing our chins. But the cell phone records added another layer, because they placed Mark near the Greenbrier apartments, where Shelton's car was later found. And this was roughly 2 hours after Mark claimed Shelton left him that night. Not to mention his phone pinged off a cell phone tower just steps away from Park Lane Road. And then there were words that came straight from Mark's mouth. Yep, because they brought up those 2 stupid questions that he asked during that 2005 interview. But still, without a full confession, everything remained circumstantial. And Mark's defense leaned hard on that. They argued that without a body, there's no proof that a crime even occurred, and that Shelton Sanders was legally still a missing person, and that suspicion, no matter how strong, is not evidence. And that statement right there felt like a complete jab to Shelton's family. Because Shelton wasn't the kind of man who would just disappear on his own. He called home, he kept his family updated, he had plans, dreams, commitments. Hell, he was days away from being somebody's best man, and a future that he was actively building. And people like that didn't just vanish. But time had already done its damage. Because by the time this dude Mark went to trial in April of 2008, nearly 7 years had passed since Shelton disappeared. And the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. So a mistrial was declared. And with that, Mark's raggedy self walked free, and Shelton still remained missing. Now, Mark could technically be retried if new evidence ever emerged, but unfortunately, since this trial, no new evidence has come forward. And unfortunately, that's where this case ends, y'all. Now, this case kind of boiled my blood, which is why I decided to do it. I have a question that I was thinking about while I was recording this. Did this man have help? Like, did somebody help him? Or, he was said to have mental health issues. So, those personalities really are like different people in their heads. Maybe he really did do something with him, and he doesn't even remember because it was a different personality. Hell no, that's crazy. But I bet it really chaps their hides to know that, or to strongly believe that Mark did it, but have absolutely no evidence to charge him with. So until then, he's just out here skipping his happy tail around amongst us, a free man, knowing that he's going to take this secret with him to his grave. But y'all, I hope you enjoyed this week's case, and as usual, I'll see y'all back here, same place, same time next week.
Guns and butter, baby.